situation in Ukraine and the great talk about World War III is causing quite a bit of turbulence in countries like Pakistan. There is a group of people who feel that the time for the death of the Western giant, which became the predominant political force after the mid-1400s and slowly and gradually increased in power, is coming to an end, and Ukraine is maybe their last convulsion before they are dead and finished. There are people for about people in the media who for about a decade are talking of the future centuries of the East, where the East would be predominant, supported by the statistics, as most of the production of the world and the trade, it is shifting towards the East. Let's say talk about the Far East, China and the Pacific and so on. From Pakistan's point of view, there is considerable nervousness both in the official circles and in the common street for a very different reason. Because Pakistan is closely aligned to China militarily and to a lesser extent commercially, but the sum total of the problem is that Pakistan does not want to annoy the West, with which it has always been traditionally linked, culturally especially and traditionally, and China, with which it has got a good relation for the last 50 years, and in many ways acts as China's surrogate, military surrogate, as well as its market. There is one thing which has been discussed in the world, but which has been somewhat suppressed in Pakistani media to a small extent, is the latest war of Nagorno-Karabakh. Nagorno-Karabakh, in a sense, is a prelude to the war in Ukraine. Because in Nagorno-Karabakh, the Azerbaijan, Turkish, Pakistani troops and Israeli weapons were used in overwhelming the Armenia. Armenia in Central Asia is militarily linked to some extent with Iran and Russia. Then if you see these days the Turkish media is quoting Russian media, criticizing Mr. Erdogan, that Mr. Erdogan was very much instrumental in getting the war in Ukraine started and encouraging a tough stance on behalf of the Ukrainian leadership, to which it also supplies some advanced weapons, especially the drones, military drones. It is now established almost in international media that Mr. Biden wants Ukraine to become a Vietnam for Russia. But the problem is that will Europe not want a Vietnam in Far East as well? to relieve some pressure. But that would be more of a China's strategy, because Chinese wished that the Russians make some inroads and keep them busy. The entire Europe keeps them busy in the Europe theater, so that they can advance in the Taiwan, the South China Sea. While Mr. Biden is taking a very tough stance on the economic issues, because he feels that the massive steps taken against Russia might scare off China. Pakistan has got a very big problem, because for about 40 years the Arab Sunni regimes offered Pakistan to play a much wider role, especially after the Iranian Revolution in the Middle East, and they were prepared to fund it quite a bit. But the Pakistan, because of its link with neighbor Iran, and because of its fight with India, and trouble in Afghanistan, was not willing to increase tension with the Iranians. And besides, there was always a very dominant type of ruling class in Pakistan, which had very strong Shia sect influence. Over the years, however, Iran has sort of made an alliance with Russia, and the Sunnis of Pakistan see the persecution by Russia in Syria, where carpet bombardments have also been done against Sunni areas in Syria, which is quite well known. Then there is fear of that supposing the South China Sea war rages, then what will happen to the Chinese ports? Would China be interested in opening ports through Gwadar, or opening ports through Myanmar, Burma, or Bangladesh, or whatever, meaning that they might be tempted to invade some of the other countries to get a hold on the sea and the ports. There are Muslims who feel that the Western grip, this opportunity of Ukraine war and the West and Russian struggle and Chinese struggle, might loosen Western grip in Africa, and those artificial boundaries which were created by the colonists, in which several possible Muslim states were aborted by making the boundaries in such a design that independent Muslim states don't become possible. And it is quite possible that if the Western influence is loosened and the Chinese and other influences are also relaxed, the Muslims in Africa might get an opportunity to create 9-10 small additional Muslim states. Then obviously, if somehow there is weakening of China and Russia, this will again loosen the grip in Central Asia, leading to possibly 1 or 2 additional Muslim states, in addition to the increase in the sovereignty of the Central Asian states, which currently are mostly under the Soviet grip, the former Soviet grip, which is now Russian influence. And the recent events in Kazakhstan also suggest that. The United States has, for a very long time, inherited some of the policies from the British. One of the reasons that there was a significant portion of British who did not want Pakistan to be created was that they were seeing that the communists are gaining strength in China, and they wanted a unified Indian army, which they felt that if India is unified, they might be in a better position to counter China through them. This is a kind of hope which during Nehru's time in '62 was the main focus of USA policy, but we did not succeed because of the poor performance of the Indian troops. And later on, China successfully increased the tension between India and Pakistan, encouraged the 1965 Kashmir War, which meant that Pakistan and India fell so much far apart that China did not have to worry too much about India anymore, because Pakistan was enough for it. Then there are problems for Pakistan, because Pakistan, although it's an Islamic state, is comparatively a very well knit state between various communities, but still there is a strong Pashtun lobby in all types of services, which hopes since Ayub days to govern and rule and be very important in Pakistan despite being a minority. And this desire is not new. This is since Abdali days or even before that. And then although Sikhs are in trouble, but they do have got the holy places in what is Pakistani Punjab, and it won't take much time for them to develop some designs. Pakistan's problem is that we are in this so much advanced era in which we are seeing that how the Iranian nuclear program is being sabotaged by Israel, and various types of things, and anti-missile missiles, so on, that whether Pakistan's nuclear deterrent is that much a deterrent anymore or not. This obviously requires a very high level of scientific inquiry, and to make sure that Pakistan does not become another Ukraine, and has got a very strong nuclear deterrent, because apparently in a future conflict Pakistan may have nobody to protect them except themselves. Iron Curtain foreign policy, meaning that we participate less in foreign conflicts, is also a kind of possibility for Pakistan, where it might actually end, because the basic framework of Pakistani foreign policy, which was Islamic, has shifted from Islamic to secular, and then there was the support of the Middle Eastern allies, who themselves are now closer to India, and the Western support, which is wavering all the time, basically means that Pakistan's foreign policy, the secular foreign policy of Pakistan, the Western following foreign policy of Pakistan has collapsed. To make a pro-China or pro-Russia policy, the giants, and you know very well that if you have got a giant which is 5,000 miles away, and if you have got a giant which is next door, one has to be wary of both of them, especially the one who is very, very near. Recently, there has been Imran Khan's visit to Russia. What was the scenario of that? I mean, it has been commented in newspapers, whether it is oil issue or whether there is some message being conveyed to people and so on. But the fact remains that one of the reasons the West is in this situation is they spent 15 trillion in 20 years on Iraq and Afghanistan, killing poor people, which gave time to China and Russia to develop in the right direction while they were in the wrong direction. Their democracy had degenerated to discussions on male-to-male marriage and concern with self-sex assignment and using UN and other bodies to force even Muslim countries like us to change our Islamiyat curriculum to support these kind of nonsense ideas. And then, there is among our Arab-rich, oil-rich Arabs, what we see is that there's a whole generation of children which were raised up by the non-Muslim maids and too much contact with the West from India, from Philippines and so on. And these children don't appear to have that much strong Islamic entity which was there before, and we are seeing that in Saudi Arabian policies, in UAE policies, and so on. However, there are certain things which are noticeable. For example, recently there has been some Chechen troops which were fighting in the Ukraine on behalf of Putin, which is very shameful because the Ukraine government is fighting for their independence, and the Muslims with these big beards, Chechens, fighting for a war in which, they really don't have any share, is very interesting. It reminds me of the late Ottoman era when the Greek princes, royal families, were made governors in Europe, elsewhere, whereas Greece itself was under the slavery of the Ottomans, which was very strange. Then we hear of activities of a Russian group called Wagner Group, which is a bit like the Blackwater Group, and they seem to be active quite a few places, including in Africa, in military activities, and maybe even in Libya. Pakistan recently, before this tension, for some years, they were warming up to Russia because there was a period after the 1965 war when Ayub Khan wanted closer contact with the Russians, and that is why we had a Tashkent Declaration, which led to a proper ceasefire after the 1965 war. And then we obviously have the Karachi steel mill, which was not a very successful venture at the end, being a state enterprise. But this was the first steel mill made by the Russians. And in the late 60s, there were some missile deliveries also from Russia. Pakistan, one of the reasons that Pakistan fell from the grace of the Western world was that Pakistan's policy from strongly pro-Western turned to a very choice and a very variable type of policy, one side at one time, other side at the other time. So it was never regarded as a firm member of the Western alliance. One thing which is very clear on looking at the map is that the ports of China are very, very vulnerable in the sense that their outlets are surrounded by countries not very friendly with China, like Japan and the Muslim Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and so on, which are more of a part of a Western alliance. And if you go further down, there is India, there is Australia, and so on, which means really that the strength of China as an exporting power is not really as strong and as secure as some people think. Similarly, Russia, for example, it is said that these days the armed force is about 1 million. It used to be quite a bit more before. But if you look at that, apart from the technological and the nuclear power they have, this is really not an enough force for such a big landmass. And once there is a problem within Russia, one can really expect them to lose control over vast territories. In Pakistan, we always like to be busy about. There is a recent judgment, for example, a certain judge in Islamabad who is saying that we'll abrogate all the nikahs below 18 years of age, and because that's the legal age of nikah or whatever. And now these are challenging the Shariat right away. And it is a very dangerous precedence that there is a group in Pakistan which is trying to influence the content of the religious books, which is trying to influence the way we look at life and the way we look at the hereafter and the way we look at Islam. And these types of things, I mean, they tear the national unity from the middle. We should not forget that even in the armed forces, the lower cadres are more Islamic, the one who are the real fighting force, even though the officers might be more westernized. This is same is the case in police, same in the case in real life. The poor people are much attached to religion, and the moment they get any leadership structure or something, Pakistan is going to turn towards religion in no time. Although the influences of cultural influences and other influences, tribals, religious, sectarian, have successfully stopped that. And since we are talking about the Ukraine crisis and its effect on Pakistan, it is apt to say that at least I have not seen so much foreign policy confusion as to which side to take, and so much uncertainty for a very, very long time. And it is for this reason that the trip of Mr. Imran Khan to Russia was so heavily criticized in the media that, and then the Pakistan's non-participation in condemning Russia, even though Pakistan has been a victim of India crossing geographical boundaries. India obviously abstained because India has been doing the same thing in Sikkim and Bhutan, and if given an opportunity, they would do it again. And our naive Middle Eastern brothers don't know that the moment the Western powers get weak, India would be tempted to take over the rich Gulf states. But anyway, with this rambling sort of presentation with errors of and a lot of speculation, I would thank you for your kind patience.